Hi, welcome to the One Voice COVID-19 update brought to you by the National Tooling and Machining Association and the Precision Metal Forming Association. I'm Paul Nathanson. I'm with Bracewell's Policy Resolution Group. As we do every Friday, we're going to give you an update on things that are happening regarding legislation and other issues. Just a reminder that we do record this webinar and it's available on the website onevoiceinfo.org, and we also make the slides available, so don't feel like you have to take notes. So I'll introduce my colleagues and then turn it over. I am joined by my Bracewell colleague, Caitlin Sickles, and from our friends at the Franklin Partnership, Omar Nashashibi and John Guzik. So I will turn it over to Omar to start things off. And again, if you have questions during the webinar, please submit them via the WebEx option there, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can, and the ones we can't, we'll try to follow up with you. Omar?
Thanks. Actually, John, why don't you go ahead and get us going on, let's just jump straight to an agenda slide here, and we can kick it off from there, John.
Yeah, for all you guys know us by now. Many of you have been on this call for a number of weeks now, and so we appreciate that participation and interest. We're switching it up a little bit this time. The federal government is moving a lot of money out the door as a result of these the phase 1 through 4 phases of dealing with the pandemic. Along with moving that money, they're issuing a number of guidances. But there's a number of guidances that impact the manufacturing sector that we're waiting on. We're going to touch on that. We're going to update you the CISA list of the definition of essential business. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk some labor issues, some OSHA updates, some EEOC, Americans with Disability Act updates. We're going to talk a little bit about what the new normal is going to mean now moving forward under this pandemic. Obviously, the president's going to sign any minute now the new Paycheck Protection Plan. So we'll talk a little bit about that and what's in that piece of legislation, and continue to talk about next steps. And as Paul said, ask your questions during this webinar. We'll try to answer them during it. We won't necessarily leave it till the end. Omar?
Thanks, John. And so let's just start with what we will not talk about. The most frustrating questions that we're getting right now from a lot of our members is what are the rules about forgiveness? What are the process? What are the final terms? Because we get a lot of questions about what is the pay period I need to be reviewing? What does dental included? What is included in forgiveness? We still don't have that rule yet. As John mentioned, we get a number of different guidance documents that come out, and this is one on which we are all still anxiously waiting, including your lenders as well. We are hearing that probably next week, it's supposed to be now next week, we should get the guidance document. To be honest, we believe that Treasury and SBA did not put as much of a priority on it because they looked at it as they basically had up to 8 weeks to get this thing out, because that's the timeline for the forgiveness period out there. So we do not have a guidance yet on the forgiveness. So we will not be, unfortunately, addressing anything new that we have not already discussed on previous webinars with regards to that. We do hope to have that next week, and as such, we will discuss it on next Friday's noon webinar if we do have that. We also do not have the full Main Street Lending Fund guidance for the loans that will be for up to 10,000 employees. That is for primarily initially for the 500 to 10,000, but technically it's open for one employee up to 10,000 businesses. That should be up and running in the coming week. Part of it is they had a comment period that was open, the Federal Reserve did, and they wanted to accept some comments in that process. And we suspect that hopefully early next week, because it should have been, honestly, probably by today, it should have been up. So we're expecting early next week. And no, for your CPAs out there, we do not have the updated quarterly filing for your 941 form to reflect the EPSL and EFMLA refundable credit there. So those are the 3 hot items that we're waiting on. We are expecting to get all 3 of those next week that we can speak to on next Friday. One item that we did want to quickly point out here, you do have an essential business definition update. This did come out last Friday after we concluded our webinar, so we are now on version 3.0. Recall, this is a non-binding guidance that's been issued by the federal government, but has been adopted by a number of states, particularly quite a few of them. They've actually just flat out started to reference what we call the CISA. So if you ever hear at the state level someone says we're using the CISA definition, that's what this is, CISA.gov. And you can see the main changes under critical manufacturing. They clarified that the aerospace supply chains are deemed essential, along with, this is just a blanket, they added this bullet at the end here, workers, manufacturing, continued operation of essential businesses and facilities. So basically, anybody that is supplying and manufacturing parts to any of the 16 categories deemed essential, you are also part of now that essential list. And then especially for our friends in Michigan, they did provide some clarification down on the bottom. Automotive equipment manufacturing and distribution facilities under the transportation and logistics definition, not under critical manufacturing. That's where they clarified the automotive. So we now have additional guidance and we're doing a little bit better there. But John, they have been putting out a couple of posters coming out from OSHA, and this is just one on manufacturing specifically that we wanted to flag for you too.
Yeah, but before we jump there, let me talk about the little problem we're having with our southern neighbor. The federal government in Mexico is sympathetic to the United States' use of this CISA guidelines. We were on a call this past week with the Department of Homeland Security, and on that call, they had a member of the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City on the line. What's happening in Mexico is while the feds are pushing the states in Mexico to adopt the CISA guidelines, the states, particularly the border states to the United States, are pushing back on much stricter guidelines. And so many U.S. businesses who are looking at, getting back to work, that they're being hamstrung by the state governments in the border states. And so what we've learned is essentially Mexico got the coronavirus later than the United States. They don't peak for another 2 weeks. And when we were in the call just this past week, they thought the earliest that Mexico would open up would be May 15th. The Mexican federal government has now just yesterday delayed that till May 30th, and it may be extended beyond that. And so we heard earlier this week that GM had a customer call and telling them that they want to get up and running by May 1st or May 4th. Well, that decision is contingent on two decisions made by people in the United States and people in Mexico. One is, is the UAW willing to support opening up the automobile facilities? As of yesterday, I read in a Michigan newspaper that UAW is not. They don't believe their employers can remain healthy. So that will limit the automobile companies from gearing up. The second decision is the decisions made at the southern states and the southern borders. And so those are two critical decisions to get this company moving again.
We want to put that, before you jump onto that, I think it's an important point that you just don't want to look at it within the context of the automotive supply chain. I think that there's, with regards to Mexico, and it's not just about them shipping parts and us shipping them back. It is important that all three, that Canada, the US, and Mexico, are all trying to be on the same page. And to John's point, we did just have another call prior to this. And so the three countries are now starting to talk a little bit more. And so you want to think of it as movement of people, movement of goods, and just cleaning up some of the confusion that's been out there, particularly for automotive. And keep in mind that a lot of our members that are in automotive, you do need to be watching this issue closely, as John mentioned, because it's going to dictate your restart times. Because many of you are saying, but I have no business. How am I going to bring in my employees back to work and still get my loan forgiven? So in the context of loan forgiveness, you also want to be watching Mexico as well if you're in automotive, John.
I would only add, Omar, that from Bracewell's perspective, that we're hearing about problems in Mexico from a lot of different industries, a lot of different types of manufacturing. So it's a widespread problem.
Moving forward, OSHA has issued what we would consider some very common sense guidelines moving forward of how to, how people should continue to work in this new world that we're living in, maintaining social distancing, teaching your employees how to not only properly put on their personal protective equipment, but also how to properly dispose of the equipment. They suggested possibly moving some of your equipment. It's a little more difficult in a manufacturing facility. Train. They encourage no sharing of tools and equipment. And then after each shift, perhaps do some particular cleaning and maybe increasing some time limits between shifts. Monitor public health announcements and making sure that the owners educate their employees on how best to address those new public health emergencies. And then review the EPA cleaning guidelines. That is very important. They've got essentially the EPA has issued a list of approved cleaning guidelines, and that manufacturers utilize those. The Department of Labor has also issued a set of common sense guidelines on what to do. This is a poster. It's not required to be posted in your facility, but we would argue it's such common sense. It makes sense to just put this poster up. Simple stuff. If you're sick, don't come to work. That's, is probably something that we've always told our employees, but, moving forward, this is going to be very important. Making sure that your employees understand if you're going to cough, cover your mouth, use your elbow. Make sure you remind your workers to wash their hands regularly. See, these comments, if you can provide telework opportunities for your employees, they encourage that. And the EPA list of disinfectants, and so we encourage you to continue to put these posters up.
I think something John just said here is really important. A lot of these are frankly common sense, and I think what you want to look at it as we discuss now the discretion and enforcement memo that OSHA issued recently is if you think that you err on the side of caution. When you're taking your driver's test, the answer is whatever is safest. Same thing here. You want to err on the side of caution where if you do have an OSHA inspection, whether it's for a recordable or a follow-up later on, that you can demonstrate you did everything possible. This is a recent memo. These are not our interpretations, but again, copy and paste directly from the OSHA memo. And this went out not to employers, but to their area offices and to their actual inspectors. What they understand is that you're going to have some challenges. We would look at this as the slide of what regular safety checks that an outside consultant would normally do can I not conduct right now due to closings or our restrictions on outsiders coming into our shop. So for example, if you're regularly scheduled to have a monthly or an annual audio test to test out for the sound and hearing and the potential injury to employees in certain parts of the facility, they'll understand if you do not have that done on the exact timeline that you normally would. However, you must take essentially, you must move forward as quickly as possible following that period and get to the reopening and have it done. So it's not an opportunity to skip the test or the equipment inspections and the auditing by the third parties, but it is an opportunity for you to say, okay, if I need to bring in a third party person, now's not the best time. This can maybe wait 30 days. Again, this is not obviously to stand in the way of any normal safety and hazard identification and mitigation that you might be doing. This again is mostly focused on getting the outsiders that are in. So this will give you a better sense of what you can expect if you had something coming up as well. One of the questions that we've gotten quite often, and usually it's asked in anger, is about the $600 that was provided for those that on unemployment insurance. And this is in addition to what the states give out. And we've heard from folks in western parts of Ohio saying, well, look, we're going to get $300 from the state of Ohio for their unemployment compensation. Now the feds are going to give them another $600. That's more than I'm paying them. Why should they come to work? We've got another examples in Minnesota where I think the average is $742 a week, but Massachusetts is about 800 something, and then you add $600 a week on top of it. We understand the frustration, but we've been advising for some time now that it's not as easy as I want to quit for more money. This again is taken directly from, this is a screenshot that we did of a new guidance that we got this week from the Department of Labor. I was furloughed by my employer, but they have now reopened and asked me to return to my job. May I remain on unemployment? The answer is no, because you now have the ability to work. And so for that reason, you need to go back to work and you cannot continue to accept the $600. And that's something to be careful with, because again, some employees certainly think that it's a nice ticket to ride and they don't realize that it ends on July 31st and it ends immediately when they have the ability to go back to work. And in this case, this is an official guidance. You can click on the link below. If they don't believe you, this is where they can go with it. But this one slide is even more to the point, where you take a look at the question, and this is the one that we've pretty much kept getting over the last 3 weeks. One of my workers quit because he or she said they would prefer to receive the unemployment compensation benefits under the CARES Act. Are they eligible for unemployment? If not, what can I do? No, they would not be eligible for regular unemployment compensation or the pandemic unemployment assistance, which is basically the extra $600. Their eligibility would vary based on state by state, but generally no. Again, they have to have the inability to work for one of those required reasons, that either the doctor has said that it's a risk for them to go into a workplace, or that their facility, place of business, has been closed due to COVID-19. So generally no. Quitting to get the extra $600 is not a qualifying reason for the expanded $600. Again, we're not lawyers, this is not legal advice, especially because each state does something differently. As always, you are counseled to go seek your local counsel, familiar with the laws in that local region. But no, they cannot quit for the reason of they want added $600.
Then the EEOC and the ADA have come out with additional guidance. As we all look at getting back to work, what are the rights and obligations and such of manufacturers? And so this is a guideline from the EEOC. Can I, as a manufacturer, do basic medical treatment on my employees? Can I require them to take the temperature? And yes, this is a guidance that basically says that employers can conduct selected medical exams, for job-related businesses. However, the ADA then clarifies that yes, an employer can mandate personal protective equipment for all of their employees, but they must make accommodations for those in the disability community. For example, if you are allergic to latex gloves, the ADA says employers must make accommodations for those people moving forward.
What we thought we would do here is we're starting to get quite a bit of questions about what should I do and what are some folks doing as the country starts to slowly reopen, so to speak. We can't, again, give all that advice. So what we're starting to do to the best of our ability is collect some of the best practices. Again, these are not mandated. Everything up until now has been a government slide. The next 3 slides are not government policy. The next 3 are from actual manufacturers such as yourself, and take a look at a few of the requirements that they've got here. For example, John just mentioned it, the obvious, the PPE requirements and training. If possible, can you put guards between workstations? And certainly if you do not have a cubicle, but an open office type of environment outside the shop floor, is there ability to put up some kind of plexiglass or some other barrier between employees that are in the office space as well? One thing we've heard quite a bit about is spacing out the shifts a bit longer, and doing a longer transition. We'll talk about the 3P program and what Congress did yesterday, but Congress took 2 votes yesterday and a 30-minute break in between for people to come down and clean out the House floor and to sanitize it and disinfect it. So simple things, if Congress can figure that out, then hopefully some others will start doing the same as well. We're already hearing from you all that you're certainly, as John mentioned, cleaning tools between shift changes. Something else that's starting to increasingly access, we know one of our manufacturers that we'll talk about in a little bit here they're already manufacturing different ways to open doors without touching them, for example, and putting different couplings on the handles, etc. So touchless access, how can you get employees to clock in, out without physically having to touch an item or touch a machine? Or a keyboard, even for that matter. Automated doors, you've seen some when you go in the hospitals, you can kick a stand or on the little switch on the right, and that'll pop open the door. Are there other ways to try to do that? We were on a webinar last week, and someone from, I think it was Quality Trucking, but a large trucking service, said one of the biggest concerns, and we were asked about how can COVID sit on carbon steel and other items. Biggest threat is from the driver and to the driver. So if you all do have a phone in the reception or an outdoors phone that a truck driver or delivery person uses to radio into you all saying we're here, try to make sure that there's some kind of equipment out there, if it's gloves for them to handle or wipes, or a remote-less way for them to access and notify you, or a visitor to notify you. That's another best practice we're starting to pick up on. We won't spend much time on the installing copper fixtures, but apparently the shelf life of COVID-19 is not very long on copper. So that is something that some companies have been taking a look at what's out there. And so, yes, thank you. We just got a recommendation that there's in the question box that there's hands-free sink faucet control valves for your shop and things like that. When I worked in an auto shop, we used to turn the water on with our feet, for example. You just step on it. So that's the type of situation that I think the best practices that people are starting to look at. This slide and the next one, these are taken from 2 tier 1 autos. We won't disclose whom they are. But again, this focuses on the PPE, the use and establishment of who's required, how to use it, as John mentioned, how to clean it. establish inventory requirements at a minimum week-by-week basis for this company, and then it'll come down to the training. If you've got N95 masks, you are required by OSHA to conduct a full training, because those things don't work if they don't actually fit you properly around in certain places, especially with some men with facial hair that have to be careful about how they're trained to put that on. And then separately, if they're non-395, non-N95s, then there is still some other minor training that you would most likely be required to do based on manufacturer's instructions. So again, these are just some of the best practices, but this is the one we'd like to draw some more attention to right before we switch over into the next laws and where they are. This one here says what they'd like to do for special for amount of days that are out there. And again, these are, from what we understand, we got them as the tier ones here sent it around to their different counterparts, their HR departments. So again, I don't think there's any proprietary. They're sending it, they're emailing it and sharing it to their supply chains as a way to show them what we're doing and what they're doing in different operations. So in this one here, they're looking at a 30-day supply for masks. And this one was put together before some of the openings started to happen again. And during that time period, what we've seen is some of these companies saying, we anticipate this going to be a requirement, and now you increasingly are starting to see the requirements of PPE, particularly face mask requirements by the states. So you've got Pennsylvania did it, you had another one, I think just last night, also require new PPE requirements for those in the shop. So again, this is not a government guide, but this is just showing you what some of the tier ones that are out there and that they're starting to do, and we've seen this from some of our member companies as well. But John, I think we just do a quick review of where we are. Anything in green on this slide is now signed into law as of today. Trump is supposed to sign it at noon today. I don't know if he's done it yet, but this is where we are now in legislation.
Yeah, and so we're going to talk more about the PPP program, the specifics about it, but also in this phase 4 piece of legislation included $75 billion for hospitals, $25 billion for testing. Many believe that this country will not get back to work until there's more widespread testing. But before the president even signs this phase 4, the battle lines are being drawn over phase 5 and what phase 5 may look like. The president wants to continue individual payments to American citizens with $1,200 per person, $500 per child. The president would like to see that continued. Senator Mitch McConnell has made it clear that he doesn't want to bail out state and local governments for bad decisions that they've made in the past regarding their pensions and stuff. Yet Senator Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, their top priority is going to be more funding for state and local governments. They believe that was part of the discussion and the negotiation with the Treasury Secretary on this last plan that was not included. They are also looking at money for mail-in ballots and a whole number of other provisions in addition to state and local government funding. So I was reading something that, while it was difficult to get this last bill passed, it took 2 weeks, probably longer than it should have, but they said that was still a honeymoon in Washington terms. Well, the honeymoon is probably over, looking to phase 5, how it ends. The Congress doesn't come back into session until May 4th. And so McConnell has indicated he's not going to start negotiating with anybody until they start negotiating in person. So if they're in May 4th, most likely, we could see probably a deal sometime by May 31st. Also included in this, we anticipate additional money for the Paycheck Protection Program because, the $300 billion that was passed this year, and the president that's going to sign today, it's probably going to last a week, probably no more than 2 weeks. And so that program will run out of money. As I think we mentioned last week on the webinar, a banking trade association executive anticipated that the PPP program will need a total of $1 trillion. And so, again, it's going to leave manufacturers in a difficult situation moving forward. But for planning purposes, we should anticipate that it probably is not going to happen until Memorial Day.
Well, and I'd like to just pause for a minute because we're talking about trillions and billions, and my 5 and 8-year-olds like to play with Monopoly money, and it feels like members of Congress are starting to do the same. This is real money, and we get it. And there's a question that was rightfully asked about the concern about the level of spending. And to put it in perspective, the government outlays are $4.7 billion. We bring in for the FY 2020 4.7 trillion, and our intake was 3.6 trillion. So we're running a little bit about a $1.1 trillion deficit, and that doesn't even count anything that we're spending. So right now, if we do 4.7 as your annual, we're now hovering just a shade under 3 trillion. The next one's going to add another trillion. Yes, we see your concern. We attended via Zoom a fundraiser for a senior Democrat member of Congress on Wednesday. And he's very senior. Those of you from Connecticut know him, and some of you actually do like him. And he is very concerned about spending. And this is a old school Tip O'Neill type of New England Democrat. And he's every time we actually brought up the issue about we don't believe that the pent up demand for durable goods is going to be as quick as it is for people going down to the Irish for a pint. It's going to take some time to get that kind of consumer driven demand ramped up. And he's pretty much cut us off and said, you know, we don't have the money for stimulus. We got to figure out how to pay for it. Now, this Democrat's thinking is we got to go back to war bonds. We have to find other ways to generate money. At least he wasn't looking at additional taxation. But yes, the conversations are going on, but you have to keep in mind that is not a priority for this administration. You will see another round of checks that go out that have President Trump's signature on them, most likely sometime, if not in May, in early June. So yes, there is a small sliver of folks that are starting to look at how to pay for it. Specifically, this one Democrat who's very senior on the tax writing committee is starting to think about creating creative options that don't include making you all pay for it. Before we jump into the three,
No, go ahead.
Before we jump into the 3P program, we got a question previously in terms of the health benefits covered under 3P. We cannot state that this is for forgiven. So if you're looking at forgiveness language, we don't have that yet, as we mentioned. We won't get that guidance hopefully until we'll get it hopefully rather next week. But this is from a CPA firm that some of you know and many of us trust. So when we asked the question of them, because we kept getting it, is dental included or HSAs included? This is the interpretation in terms of the calculation of payroll costs, in terms of what we've seen that's out there. Medical plans, obviously, HRAs, dental plans would be included in payroll costs, vision plans, your RX plans as well, and your health FSAs. So again, these are the ones that are being interpreted as being included as part of payroll costs as of now, which hopefully means it will be included at time of forgiveness. Those on the right, supplemental life, long-term, short-term disability, those are not considered part of your payroll costs according to interpretations that we're seeing from the CPAs that are out there. So that's just something to take back as you're starting to look at your calculation. Again, we don't have the final answer on forgiveness, but at least this gives us a head start on where we're going. And as you take a look at where we've been, these are the final numbers that we have as of last Thursday at noon, and 1.6 million loans given out via 5,000 lenders. We've got about, again, 349 billion was what was allotted. Manufacturing came in third, over $40 billion worth of loans to over 108,000 manufacturers was the final number. Your average, so the average loan overall to everybody was 206,000. For manufacturers, we believe the average loan was about 375,000. So this gives you sort of a trend line in the breakout, and this is an update of the slide that we had before. But, you know, John, last night and yesterday, and hopefully now, we're going to see some more action on the 3P program.
Yes, so the Congress passed in phase 4, $310 billion in PPP funded. Of that, there's $250 billion for the traditional PPP program, but there was a set aside for $60 billion for smaller lending institutions. Of that 60, 30 billion will go to lending institutions with revenues of 10 to 50 billion, and then another 30 billion for the smallest lending institutions under $10 billion in assets. The problem is when the system went down, when they ran out of money, when they went through the $349 billion in less than 14 days, there were already 800,000 applications in the queue. Given the additional $310 billion moving forward, we anticipate, and given the average amount of a loan of roughly $206,000, there's probably only 700,000 additional loan applications that will be funded through this new legislation. We know that there's been some controversy over publicly traded companies, Ruth Chris, Shake Shack, other colleges like Harvard were receiving money under the PPP program. There's many of these publicly traded companies have already said that they're returning that money, and so that is just additional funds. But based on Morgan Stanley, the total is roughly 243,000 money. So, well, that's still a lot of money when you're dealing with billions. It wasn't all that amount of money, but know that this money is going to be going through really quickly. We're also hearing some of the very largest banks are no longer accepting new applications because they know that this program is going to run out of money, and they're just going to move those applications that they, that they essentially have in the queue moving forward.
Well, Paul, what did you hear with regards to some of these larger institutions and publicly traded this week? I think there was a guidance that came out from Treasury on it.
Yeah, there's sorry, I had to unmute. There is additional guidance that came out from Treasury, and particularly our larger clients. We're telling them to look at it very closely. Obviously, when the media starts scrutinizing the larger loans, that prompted the administration to scrutinize some of the loans. Some of the stories weren't 100% accurate, but it's an easy one for the media to look at. The Harvard one, they didn't receive money from the PPP, but we're telling all our clients that there will be extra scrutiny, both from the media and obviously from the administration and from Treasury on these loans.
Yeah, the list will be made public eventually. That is going to happen. It's not going to probably happen, I would argue, till later in the year, or even next year, or at some point. But in the future, they will find a way to make this list public of who actually received it as they look for conflicts of interest and actual needs. And even one banker speculated that when the funding and the lights get turned back on for this thing, that they'll be gone in 48 hours. Because I think John's correct. If you've already got 800 in the queue, and many of the major multi-state banking establishments are saying they're not going to participate because they themselves already have so many in the queue, it's going to be tough to see how this goes. So the question would be, one, when does the program get up and running again? Just trying to switch a TV now to see if they're showing Trump signing it. He was supposed to sign the new $484 billion law today, or bill today, into law at noon Eastern. So that should be happening any minute now. And from our understanding, the SBA would then have to turn back on and open up what we call the e-trans portal. And when they do that, they'll probably first post a notice. Given that it's already Friday, 12:30, we're running a little late here. We can't imagine the portal being open up tonight. We're hoping then that probably we can get something back turned on Monday once the authorization is set and continues. And that brings us to the next steps. I mean, the last 30 days, Congress, the U.S. House of Representatives hasn't been in Washington, D.C. since March 27th. That was the last time they had any floor action, and today is April 24th. So effectively, there were about a dozen or so members of Congress, and Steve Mnuchin were the only ones that have been writing all of these bills so far and making all of these changes that are worth trillions of dollars. Moving forward, Congress is going to return to Washington on May 4th, and then we're going to be back to as regular order as possible. They're going to have debates, they're going to have votes, they're going to have political posturing, and that's why I think John's correct. You're not going to see a major phase 5 coronavirus bill, COVID-19, until we get closer to Memorial Day and they're ready to go back home. So I think McConnell's saying he's concerned about spending. I don't think that he really is. He's a world-class appropriator that knows how to get money and send money back home. So I think that's going to fall on deaf ears, especially since it looks like Pelosi's figured it out. She doesn't bother negotiating with McConnell. She just goes straight to Mnuchin, and then Trump tells the Senate they've got to pass something there. I don't know, John, what are your thoughts on what we're looking at for next steps in this next phase 5 here?
Well, I think McConnell's position of not giving money to state and local governments, that's an unsustainable position. I mean, he's taking the hardline position, but I think he's doing that because he realizes he's going to have to give in to money to state and local governments. The question is how much and to whom. The Pelosi or Steny Hoyer just yesterday on the floor when they passed this talked about what the next steps. They're looking at monthly cash assistance. They're looking at some rental support for people who are falling behind on the rent. As I mentioned earlier, money for mail-in ballots, and then free health care for those who have fallen ill under the COVID virus. So those are two very different perspectives going into phase 5. And that's why I think the gloves are going to come off. The honeymoon is over, and it's going to be a very long, drawn-out negotiation. And depending on the pressure that the policy leaders feel from the American public, I could even see them missing the Memorial Day deadline. But generally, big holidays like that is a deadline that Congress may want to meet, because if they don't make it by Memorial Day, the next deadline is probably July 4th, which I think that's a yard too far to have the people suffering.
I agree. That's way too long. As we get ready to wrap up here and turn it back over to Bracewell in a second, this is just an interesting slide we thought we'd share in terms of electricity consumption. That's always an indicator when we look at the economy. We look at freight, we look at coal consumption, and then obviously you want to look at your electricity consumption. And if it just wants to make you smile, you can look at the bottom three: liquor stores, pizza units, or at least those pizza and storage units. So that just kind of tells you where people are going and what is in operation and what it looks like out there in the economy today versus tomorrow, just for fun. But turn it over to Caitlin and Paul to kind of take us home here.
Caitlin.
I thought you were going first. Sorry. Okay, guys. So we've been on all of our webinars doing this call for good news stories. Now we're doing something with them in addition to pitching them to your local and national media outlets. We're also collecting them on the One Voice website. Both associations are collecting stories and then working with us to put them together. You'll be able to find them on the One Voice website under a section called Members Making a Difference. We do want to feature everyone there and also share those stories on social media. And that's just an important way, not only for us to spread the word right now, but as we've pointed out many times, these are the kinds of stories that really help generate interest from your current and future workforce. So it's important for the industry, it's important for members as individual companies as well. So that's not to say that we aren't still pitching to the media. We definitely are still doing that, even as we collect and share the stories ourselves. Here's a good example. Paul, I'll let you speak to how this one came together.
Yeah, well, the Bloomberg reporter, thanks to Jeff Asnavorian, contacted Jeff. Jeff got us involved, and we talked to the reporter, and Jeff did a great job on a profile piece that you can see on Bloomberg that will also be in our clips, and we'll be posting it as well. Jeff had only one caveat, is that the Bloomberg photographer had to take this photo that we feature here. But besides that, it all went smoothly. So he insisted on that photo, but it's a great article. So just a reminder that all these resources are available on onevoiceinfo.org. We update this several times a day, so we encourage you to continue to check it out.
Yeah, a couple of things just to flag for you that you can find here. You can certainly find today's webinar and all previous webinars, as well as the slide decks that accompany them at the top of the website. We upload them very quickly at the end of the webinar. You can also find all of the other resources that Omar and John have spoken about, specifically posters and guidance materials are all available on the website. And there's one topic mentioned early on about state actions. All of you know that the majority of decisions about who can work and when you can work and how all of that happens are happening at the state level. Do check the state section of our website for actions related to your specific state, both closure notifications, potential reopening notifications. We are tracking all of that on the One Voice website. So a great deal of content is available there. Do check it out.
And just a reminder that if you don't get enough of us on the webinar, that we do a pretty much a weekly podcast that's available. We'll be talking about these issues, also the media hits. And for the record, Jeff didn't insist on that photo, so I just want to make that clear. That was a joke. But please, wherever you get your podcasts, we're talking with One Voice, and we try to put up a new one about every week.
With that, we're happy to stick around, answer any questions. What we're trying to do again every week here is give you the latest that we've got in terms of updates. As Caitlin mentioned, this will be emailed out there. Please do check that website, and on the states, we will be updating that twice a week, every Tuesday, and then every Friday. As we know, there's going to be a lot of developments as the states take a look at some of the reopening that's out there. Okay. With that, not seeing any other questions out there. As always, feel free to reach out to NTMA, PMA, or any of us if you have any questions or would like further information. We look forward to talking to you all noon Eastern next Friday. Thank you.